Jake Morrison gripped the control stick as his ship shook violently through the atmosphere. Warning lights flashed red across every panel in front of him. The engine made terrible grinding sounds that meant nothing good. His crew of 4 held onto their seats as the small exploration vessel spun toward the green planet below. "Engine 3 is completely dead," shouted his engineer Tony Martinez from the back of the ship. "Engine 2 is losing power fast." Jake's hands moved quickly over the controls. He had been flying ships for 15 years, but never in a situation this bad. The planet rushed up toward them faster than he wanted. Through the front window he could see thick forests and winding rivers. At least it looked like a world where they might survive if they could just make it down in one piece. "Amy, can you get me any power to the landing thrusters?" Jake called to his second-in-command, Amy Chen, who sat at the navigation station. "Working on it," Amy replied. Her fingers flew over her keyboard as she tried to redirect power from other systems. "I can give you maybe 30 seconds of thrust. That's all we have left." Jake nodded. 30 seconds would have to be enough. He picked a spot near a river where the trees looked less thick. If they were going to crash, he wanted to be near water. Water meant life, and life meant hope. The ship hit the treetops first. Branches scraped against the hull like giant claws. Jake felt the whole vessel slow down as it tore through the forest. That was good. The trees were helping to stop them, even if it sounded terrible. Finally, the ship hit the ground with a massive thud that threw everyone forward in their seats. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jake heard Amy groan and Tony curse in Spanish. That meant they were alive. Jake unbuckled his harness and stood up slowly. His left shoulder hurt, but everything else seemed to work fine. "Sound off, everyone," Jake said. "Let me know you're okay." "Alive but angry," said Tony as he climbed out from under some loose equipment. "Few bumps and bruises, but nothing broken," Amy reported. Dr. Lisa Park, their medical officer and scientist, said she was fine but worried about their communication equipment. Their pilot Gary Smith had hit his head but seemed alert, and was already checking the exterior damage through the small side windows. Jake opened the main hatch and stepped outside. The air smelled clean and fresh like a forest after rain. Birds, or something like birds, chirped in the trees around them. The ship had carved a long path through the forest and now sat tilted against a large boulder. One wing was completely gone, and the other hung at a strange angle. "Well, we're not flying out of here anytime soon," Gary said as he joined Jake outside. The ship had emergency supplies for 2 weeks, but Jake hoped they would not need that long. Someone back at Earth would notice they had missed their check-in time and send a rescue mission. The problem was, this planet was not on any of the main space routes. It might take months before anyone found them. Jake walked around the ship with his crew. The hull was cracked in several places, but not broken all the way through. They could still live inside it while they figured out what to do next. Tony thought he might be able to fix one engine if he could find the right materials. Amy was more worried about food and water. "The emergency supplies will last 2 weeks for 5 people," she said. "After that, we need to find food on this planet, or figure out how to call for help." Dr. Park was excited despite their situation. She kept pointing at different plants and making notes on her tablet. "This world is amazing," she said. "The plant life is similar to Earth, but different enough to be fascinating. I think the air has slightly more oxygen than we're used to, which is why I feel so energetic." Jake was less interested in the science and more focused on keeping everyone alive. He looked around at the forest that surrounded them. It was beautiful, but also unknown. They had no idea what kind of animals lived here, or if there were other dangers they should worry about. As the sun started to set, Jake noticed something that made him stop and look more carefully. In the distance beyond the trees, he could see what looked like smoke rising into the sky. Not the smoke from a forest fire, but the thin, straight smoke that came from fires made by intelligent beings. "Amy, come look at this," Jake called his second-in-command over. Amy followed his gaze toward the distant smoke. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's not a natural fire." "No, it's not," Jake agreed. "Someone or something is making that fire on purpose." That changed everything. If there were intelligent beings on this planet, they might be friendly and helpful. Or they might see the crashed humans as invaders or threats. Either way, Jake and his crew needed to be much more careful about everything they did. Jake called everyone together as darkness fell. They built a small fire of their own using dead wood from around the crash site. He told them about the smoke he had seen and what it might mean. "So we're not alone on this world," Tony said. "That could be good news or bad news. We'll find out eventually," Jake replied. "For now, we stay together and we stay alert. We don't know anything about who or what lives here." That first night, Jake took the first watch while the others slept inside the damaged ship. He sat by their small fire and looked up at the strange stars above them. 2 moons hung in the sky, casting silver light through the forest. In the distance, he could hear sounds that might have been animals or might have been something else entirely. Jake had led exploration missions to 12 different worlds, but this was the first time he had been stranded on one. The feeling was different from just visiting. Now this world would either become their temporary home or their permanent grave. He hoped it would be the former, but planned for the possibility of the latter. As he watched the forest around there, Camp Jake had the strange feeling that they were being watched in return. Nothing he could prove or point to, but the feeling was strong enough to keep him alert all through his watch. When Amy came to replace him, he told her to trust her instincts and wake everyone if anything felt wrong. Jake finally fell asleep thinking about the smoke in the distance and wondering what tomorrow would bring. 3 days had passed since the crash, and Jake decided it was time to explore beyond their immediate camp. The ship's water recyclers had been damaged in the landing, and their emergency water would not last much longer. The river he had seen from the air during their crash looked close enough to reach in a few hours of walking. Amy wanted to send 2 people together, but Jake insisted on going alone. If there were intelligent beings on this planet, he did not want to seem threatening by bringing multiple humans at once. One person gathering water looked peaceful. A group might look like a scouting party or invasion force. Jake packed his emergency kit with water containers and basic supplies. He also brought his sidearm but hoped he would never need to use it. The morning air was cool and fresh as he left the camp and headed toward the sound of running water that echoed through the forest. The walk took longer than expected because the forest was thick with undergrowth and fallen logs. Jake had to climb over several large rocks and work his way around areas where the trees grew too close together. But the sound of the river grew stronger as he walked, and after 2 hours he finally reached the water. The river was more beautiful than he had expected. Clear water rushed over smooth rocks, creating small waterfalls and deep pools. The water moved fast, fed by melting snow from mountains he could see in the distance. Fish swam in the deeper areas, and birds drank from the shallow edges. Jake knelt by the water and filled his containers. The water was cold and tasted clean and pure. As Jake worked, he began to hear something else mixed with the sound of the river. At first he thought it might be birds calling to each other, but then he realized the sounds were different. They had a pattern and urgency that suggested communication rather than simple animal calls. Jake stood up and looked downstream. The sounds were coming from that direction and seemed to be getting closer. He moved quietly along the riverbank, trying to see what was making the noise. After walking about 50 meters, he saw something that made his heart race. 2 small figures were in the water, being swept downstream by the powerful current. Jake could see immediately that they were not human, but they were clearly intelligent beings. They had arms and legs like humans, but their skin looked different even from this distance. The smaller one was struggling to stay above water while the larger one tried to help, but was also fighting against the current. Without thinking, Jake dropped his pack and dove into the river. The water was shockingly cold, and the current was much stronger than it had looked from the bank. Jake was a strong swimmer, but the river wanted to carry him downstream just like it was carrying the 2 small beings. Jake swam as hard as he could toward the struggling figures. As he got closer, he could see them more clearly. They had large eyes and skin that looked scaled like a fish or reptile. The color seemed to shift between green and blue in the sunlight. They were definitely children by their size and the way they moved. The smaller child was the first to see Jake coming. Its eyes went wide with fear or surprise, but it did not try to swim away from him. Jake reached the larger child first and grabbed onto its arm. The child's skin felt smooth and cool, but definitely alive. Jake could feel the child's heart beating fast with fear and exhaustion. "I'm here to help," Jake said, even though he knew they could not understand his words. He hoped his tone would communicate his peaceful intentions. Jake managed to get both children into a position where he could tow them toward the riverbank. The current was still strong, but now he was swimming at an angle instead of fighting directly against the water's flow. Slowly, they made progress toward the shore. The larger child seemed to understand what Jake was trying to do and stopped fighting against his grip. The smaller one was too exhausted to do anything but hold on. Jake's muscles burned from fighting the cold water and strong current, but he kept swimming until finally his feet touched rocks on the bottom of the river. Jake dragged both children onto the river bank where they collapsed, coughing up water and shivering. They were definitely not human, but they were clearly intelligent beings. Their eyes showed awareness and gratitude even though they could not speak his language. The larger child looked to be about 10 years old while the smaller one seemed closer to 8. Both children had smooth-scaled skin that changed color slightly as Jake watched. Their eyes were larger than human eyes and colored a deep amber. They had hair, but it was more like thin, flexible spines that moved slightly in the breeze. Their hands had 4 fingers instead of 5, but the fingers were longer and more flexible than human fingers. Jake sat on the riverbank breathing hard and trying to warm up from the cold water. The children huddled together but kept looking at him with those large amber eyes. There was no fear in their expressions now, only curiosity, and something that looked like gratitude. The smaller child made soft clicking sounds that might have been their language. The larger child responded with similar clicks and whistles. They seemed to be talking about Jake because they both kept looking at him while they spoke. Jake opened his emergency pack and pulled out a thermal blanket which he offered to the children. They looked at the blanket carefully before accepting it. Jake also offered them water from his containers and some emergency food bars. The children sniffed the food carefully before tasting small bits. They seemed to like the taste and ate more. While the children ate, Jake studied them more carefully. Their clothes were simple but well made from what looked like woven plant fibers. They wore jewelry made from carved stones and metal that showed skilled craftsmanship. These were definitely not primitive beings. The larger child stood up and made gestures toward the forest. Jake understood that they wanted to go home. The child pointed at Jake, then at itself, and its sibling then made a gesture that clearly meant thank you. Jake nodded and smiled. Before they left, the smaller child ran back to Jake and pressed something into his hand. It was a small carved stone that showed figures by a river. Jake realized it was meant to represent what had just happened. The child had carved it while they sat by the water. Jake looked up to see several adult figures watching from the edge of the forest. They were much larger than the children and stood perfectly still. Jake could not see them clearly through the trees, but he knew they had been watching the entire rescue. The children ran toward the forest, calling out in their clicking language. The adult figures emerged briefly to collect the children, then melted back into the trees. But Jake had the distinct feeling that he was still being watched even after they disappeared. Jake held the carved stone in his palm and studied the simple but detailed artwork. The small figure had managed to capture the essence of the rescue in just a few carved lines. A large figure helping 2 smaller ones in wavy lines that clearly represented water. It was beautiful and touching in its simplicity. The children stood at the edge of the forest looking back at Jake. The smaller one, who had given him the stone, raised one hand in what was clearly a goodbye gesture. Jake waved back and watched them disappear into the thick trees. But he had noticed the adult figures watching from deeper in the forest, and he knew this encounter was not over yet. Jake gathered his water containers and emergency pack but stayed by the riverbank. His instincts told him to wait rather than leave immediately. After 15 years exploring unknown worlds, he had learned to trust those feelings. Something was about to happen, he was right. Within minutes, he heard movement in the forest and 3 adult figures emerged from the trees. They were much larger than the children, standing nearly 7 feet tall with broader shoulders and more pronounced scaled features. Their skin showed deeper colors and intricate patterns that looked like tattoos or natural markings. The leader wore what appeared to be ceremonial clothing made from woven fibers and decorated with carved stones similar to the one the child had given Jake. All 3 carried staffs or spears but held them in a non-threatening manner. Their body language showed caution but not hostility. Jake stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and empty. He had holstered his sidearm after the rescue and made no move toward any weapons. The lead figure stepped closer while the other 2 remained at the forest edge. Jake could see intelligence and curiosity in the being's large amber eyes. The leader studied Jake carefully, then looked at the carved stone still in Jake's hand. Recognition crossed the being's face, and Jake realized this adult knew exactly what had happened at the river. The leader made soft clicking sounds toward the forest, and the 2 children emerged again, staying close to the other adults. Now Jake could see the family resemblance. The larger child had the same eye color and facial structure as one of the adult figures. The smaller child looked similar to another adult. These were parents or guardians, coming to see who had saved their young ones. The smaller child ran up to Jake and pointed at the carved stone, then at the river, then back at Jake. The child spoke, rapidly in the clicking language while gesturing excitedly. Jake did not need a translator to understand that the child was telling the adults about the rescue. The lead adult listened carefully, then approached Jake. The being moved with dignity and obvious intelligence. When it reached Jake, it placed one hand over its heart and made a slight bow. Jake recognized this as a greeting or thank you gesture and responded by placing his own hand over his heart and bowing in return. The adult then did something unexpected. It reached into a pouch at its waist and pulled out a flat piece of what looked like polished metal. Using a sharp tool, the being began carving symbols into the metal surface. The work was quick but precise, showing skilled craftsmanship. While the adult worked, Jake studied the group more carefully. Their clothing showed sophisticated weaving and dyeing techniques. Their tools were well made and showed advanced metalworking. These were not primitive beings, despite living in a forest setting. They had chosen this lifestyle rather than being limited to it. The carving finished, the adult offered the metal piece to Jake. The symbols were more complex than the child's simple stone carving, but Jake could make out representations of humans and the scaled beings together. It seemed to be some kind of friendship token or alliance symbol. Jake accepted the gift with another bow and offered his water container to the adult. The being examined it carefully, clearly recognizing advanced technology, but not seeming afraid or covetous. After a moment, the adult took a small sip, then offered it back to Jake with what might have been approval. The larger child approached and began drawing in the dirt at their feet. The drawing showed the forest, the river, and what looked like a settlement deeper in the woods. Then the child drew stick figures representing Jake's people near what must be their crashed ship. Jake realized the child was showing him that they knew about the human camp. Jake knelt down and added to the drawing. He sketched his crashed ship and drew lines to show it was broken. Then he drew symbols for his crew members and made gestures to show they were peaceful. The adults watched carefully as Jake drew a symbol for friendship between the two groups. The lead adult studied the dirt drawings, then spoke to the other adults in their clicking language. There seemed to be a brief discussion or debate. Finally, the leader nodded and made more marks in the dirt. These showed paths through the forest and what looked like meeting places. Jake understood that he was being invited to bring his people to meet with these beings. The invitation was clear even without shared language. But Jake also sensed this was a careful first step, not a full welcome. Trust would have to be earned over time. The smaller child ran up to Jake again and made chirping sounds while pointing at the sky. Jake looked up and realized the child was pointing at his ship's trail, which was still visible as a faint line of disturbed air high above them. The child had seen them crash and understood that Jake's people were stranded. The adult leader made a gesture that Jake interpreted as a question about his people's condition. Jake drew more symbols in the dirt showing that his crew was safe but that their ship could not fly. The adult nodded with what looked like sympathy or understanding. As the sun began to set, the adults gathered the children and prepared to leave. But before going, the leader approached Jake one more time and placed both hands on Jake's shoulders. The gesture felt ceremonial and important. Jake responded by placing his hands on the being's shoulders in return. The leader spoke several phrases in the clicking language while looking directly into Jake's eyes. Jake did not understand the words, but he sensed their importance. This felt like a formal recognition or acceptance of some kind. When the leader finished, Jake simply said, "Thank you," hoping his tone would communicate his respect and gratitude. The group melted back into the forest, but Jake noticed they moved differently than when they had first appeared. Their body language seemed more relaxed and open. The children waved goodbye until they disappeared behind the trees. Jake gathered his water containers and began the walk back to his camp. As he walked, he thought about everything that had happened. First contact with an intelligent species was always unpredictable, but this had gone better than he could have hoped. The rescue of the children had created an immediate bond of trust that might have taken weeks or months to establish otherwise. When Jake reached the human camp, he found his crew anxiously waiting for his return. Amy had been ready to organize a search party if he had been gone much longer. Jake shared his water and told them about the encounter with the native beings. His crew listened with amazement and growing excitement. Dr. Park was fascinated by Jake's description of the beings and their obvious intelligence and culture. Tony wanted to know more about their technology and tools. Amy was concerned about the strategic implications of contact with a native species. Gary just wanted to know if they seemed friendly or hostile. Friendly, I think, Jake said, but cautious and careful. They're evaluating us just as much as we're evaluating them. That night, Jake sat by their fire studying the carved stone and metal gifts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as both species learned to communicate and trust each other. But tonight, Jake felt hopeful that they had taken the first steps toward something positive rather than hostile. Jake woke before dawn feeling like someone was watching him. He lay still in his sleeping bag inside the damaged ship, listening carefully to the sounds outside. Birds were beginning their morning songs, and he could hear the normal forest noises that had become familiar over the past few days. But underneath those sounds was something else. Very quietly, Jake slipped out of his sleeping bag and moved to one of the small windows. Through the cracked glass, he could see movement in the trees around their camp. Not the random movement of animals, but the purposeful movement of intelligent beings trying to stay hidden. Jake woke Amy with a gentle touch and whispered that they had visitors. Amy immediately became alert and began quietly waking the rest of the crew. Within minutes, all 5 humans were awake and aware that they were being observed. "How many do you think?" Amy whispered. Jake studied the forest carefully. "Hard to say. Maybe 6 or 8. They're staying well hidden, but I can catch glimpses of movement." Dr. Park was excited rather than nervous.
"Do you think they're the same beings you met yesterday?"
"Possibly," Jake replied. "Or maybe others from their group who want to see us for themselves." The humans waited quietly as the sun came up. Gradually, the watchers in the forest became bolder. Jake could see figures moving closer to their camp, but still staying within the tree line. These were definitely the same species he had met by the river, but different individuals. Finally, one figure stepped out of the forest and into the clearing around their crashed ship. This being was even larger than the adults Jake had met the day before and carried elaborate weapons and wore more complex ceremonial clothing. Intricate tattoos covered the visible parts of the beings, arms and face in patterns that suggested high rank or status. The figure studied the damaged ship carefully, then looked directly at the window where Jake was watching. Jake realized he had been spotted and decided it was time to make contact. He gathered the carved stone and metal gifts from yesterday, then slowly opened the ship's hatch. Jake stepped outside with his hands visible and empty. The tall figure watched every movement but showed no sign of fear or aggression. Jake walked slowly toward the being, stopping about 10 feet away. He held up the gifts from yesterday, then placed his hand over his heart and bowed as he had learned to do. The tall figure responded with the same gesture, then spoke in the clicking language. The voice was deeper than the adults Jake had met yesterday and carried obvious authority. This was clearly a leader or important person among these people. Jake heard movement behind him and turned to see Amy emerging from the ship. She carried her hands empty and visible and moved slowly and peacefully. The tall being watched her carefully but did not seem alarmed by the appearance of a second human. "I think this might be someone important," Jake said quietly to Amy. The clothing and tattoos suggest high rank. The tall being apparently heard them talking and made a gesture that clearly indicated it wanted them to continue. Jake realized the being was listening to their language and trying to understand it, just as they were trying to understand the clicking sounds. More figures emerged from the forest, but stayed at the tree line. Jake counted at least 8 watchers, all adults and all carrying weapons. But the weapons were held casually, not in threatening positions. This felt more like a diplomatic visit than a war party. The tall leader made gestures toward the forest, then toward Jake's ship. Jake interpreted this as a question about the humans' intentions and how long they planned to stay. Jake drew symbols in the dirt showing their broken ship and made gestures to indicate they wanted to repair it and leave, peacefully. The leader studied the dirt drawings carefully, then made additional marks showing what looked like tools and materials. Jake wondered if the being was offering help with repairs or just trying to understand what the humans needed. Amy knelt down and added to the drawings. She sketched what looked like metal and other materials they would need to fix their engines. The leader watched with obvious intelligence and made notes in the dirt about locations where such materials might be found. While they communicated through drawings, Jake noticed the watchers in the forest were becoming more visible. They seemed less concerned about staying hidden now that the initial contact was going peacefully. Jake could see that several of them were the same adults he had met by the river yesterday. The smaller child from yesterday's rescue suddenly broke away from the forest watchers and ran toward Jake. The tall leader made sharp clicking sounds that were clearly a command to stop, but the child ignored the order and reached Jake before anyone could intervene. The dare child chattered excitedly in the clicking language while pointing at Jake, then at the carved stone in his hand. Jake could tell the child was explaining yesterday's rescue to the tall leader. The leader listened carefully while studying Jake with new interest. When the child finished talking, the leader approached Jake and examined the carved stone more carefully. Recognition and understanding crossed the being's face. The leader spoke several phrases that sounded formal and important, then placed both hands on Jake's shoulders, just as the adult had done yesterday. But this gesture felt different, more ceremonial and significant. The leader's amber eyes looked directly into Jake's eyes while speaking in the clicking language. Jake sensed this was some kind of formal recognition or acceptance, but he did not understand the specific meaning. The leader then did something completely unexpected. From a pouch at its waist, it pulled out a small device that looked like carved wood and metal, combined in intricate patterns. The leader held the device up and made clicking sounds into it. To Jake's amazement, the device responded with sounds that were almost like human words. "Thank you," the device said in heavily accented but recognizable English. "You saved children." "We are grateful." Jake's mouth fell open in surprise. These beings had technology that could translate languages. Amy stepped closer with obvious excitement at this breakthrough in communication. "You speak our language," Jake said slowly and clearly. The device processed his words and produced clicking sounds. The leader listened, then spoke into the device again. "We learn your words from sky voices," came the translated response. "Many seasons we listen to your people talk in the stars." Jake realized they meant radio communications from human ships and colonies. These beings had been intercepting human transmissions and learning English from them. That explained how they had developed translation technology. "We come in peace," Jake said carefully. "Our ship is broken. We want to fix it and go home." The leader responded through the translator. "We know your ship is hurt. We watch you fall from sky. You are not the first sky people to come here." That was surprising news. Other humans had visited this world before. Jake wondered what had happened to those previous visitors and whether the encounters had been peaceful. "Other sky people came before us?" Jake asked. "Yes. Some good, some not good. We watch and learn which kind you are. Yesterday you show you are good people. You risk danger to save our children." The tall leader gestured toward the forest and several more adults emerged. These beings carried no weapons and moved with obvious peaceful intent. Among them, Jake recognized the parents of the rescued children from yesterday. "Your brave action yesterday brings honor to your people," the translator said. "Our law says one who saves clan children becomes family. You're now bound to us by ancient custom." Jake was not sure what that meant exactly, but it sounded positive rather than threatening. The leader continued speaking through the device. "I am warrior chief of the river clans. My name translates to Vextar in your words. I come to meet the sky person who saved my brother's children and to decide if your people can be trusted." Jake introduced himself and Amy then asked if they could meet the rest of his crew. Vextar agreed, and soon all 5 humans were standing in the clearing with 8 of the native beings. The translation device allowed for basic communication, though it was clear the technology had limitations. The meeting continued for several hours with both sides sharing information about their people and cultures. Jake learned that the native civilization was much more advanced than their forest lifestyle suggested. They had chosen to live simply but possessed significant knowledge and technology when needed. As the day ended, Vextar prepared to return to his village, but not before making a formal statement through the translator. "Tomorrow, I bring my full council to meet with you. Your action yesterday has earned you the right to formal diplomatic contact. We will discuss if your people and mine can be allies rather than strangers." Jake felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow would determine the future relationship between humans and this intelligent species. Everything would depend on both sides choosing cooperation over conflict. Jake could not sleep that night. He lay in his bunk inside the crashed ship thinking about everything Vextar had told them. Tomorrow would bring a formal meeting with the full council of the river clans. The outcome of that meeting would determine whether humans and the native species could become allies or would remain cautious strangers. Amy was having the same problem sleeping. Jake could hear her moving restlessly in her bunk across the small compartment. Finally, she gave up trying to rest and came to sit beside Jake's bunk. "What do you think they really want from us?" Amy whispered. "I'm not sure," Jake replied quietly. Vexitar seemed genuinely grateful about the children, but there's something bigger going on here. They've been watching human ships for years and learning our language. That takes planning and intelligence. "Do you trust them?" Amy asked. Jake thought carefully before answering. "I trust that they're not planning to harm us. But I think they're evaluating whether humans as a species can be trusted. Yesterday's rescue was some kind of test that we apparently passed." Dr. Park was awake too and joined their whispered conversation. "The translation device was remarkable," she said. "The technology is sophisticated but hidden inside what looks like primitive carved wood. They're much more advanced than they want us to know." "That's what worries me," Amy said. "If they have advanced technology, why are they living like forest dwellers? What are they hiding and why?" Jake had been wondering the same thing. The native beings clearly possessed knowledge and tools that could support a much more complex civilization. Yet they chose to live simply in the forest using basic weapons and clothing. There had to be reasons for that choice. "Maybe they learned something from previous human visitors," Jake suggested. Vexitar said some were good and some were not good. "Maybe they decided advanced civilizations bring more problems than benefits." Tony and Gary were awake now, too disturbed by their quiet conversation. Soon all 5 crew members were sitting together in the small compartment, discussing what tomorrow might bring. "I've been thinking about what Vexitar said about their law," Tony said. "Something about saving clan children making you family. That sounded pretty serious." "It did," Jake agreed. "But I'm not sure what it means exactly. Family obligations among alien species could be very different from human customs." Gary had been quiet but now spoke up. "I keep thinking about those weapons they were carrying. They looked primitive, but I bet they're not. Same with everything else about them." "Nothing is quite what it seems," Dr. Park nodded. "Exactly. The translation device proves they understand electronics and programming, but they hide the technology inside carved wood housings. They're deliberately presenting themselves as more primitive than they really are." Jake stood up and walked to one of the small windows. Dawn was still hours away, but he could see movement in the forest. Their watchers were still out there keeping guard over the human camp. "They're still watching us," Jake told the others. Amy joined him at the window. "I've been thinking about that too. They're not just curious observers. This feels more like protective surveillance." "Protective of what?" Gary asked. "Maybe protective of us," Jake said. "What if they're not watching us because they don't trust us? What if they're watching us because they do trust us and want to make sure we're safe?" That was an interesting thought. Jake had assumed the watchers were there to keep an eye on potentially dangerous humans, but maybe they were guards assigned to protect valuable new allies. The distinction was important, or maybe both, Dr. Park suggested. They could be protecting us while also making sure we don't do anything hostile or destructive. As dawn approached, Jake made a decision. "I'm going outside to talk to them." "Jake, that might not be a good idea," Amy said. "We don't want to do anything that could be misinterpreted before the formal meeting." "I think it's exactly the right thing to do," Jake replied. "Hiding inside our ship makes us look weak or afraid. If they're protecting us, I want to acknowledge that and show appreciation." Jake put on his jacket and stepped outside into the cool morning air. He could see several figures in the trees around their camp. Jake walked to the middle of the clearing and called out in a normal voice, "I know you're watching us. Thank you for keeping us safe through the night." There was movement in the trees and one of the native adults stepped into the clearing. Jake recognized this being as one of the parents from yesterday's meeting. The adult approached slowly and made the hand over heart greeting gesture. Jake responded with the same gesture, then pointed at the watchers still hidden in the forest. He made a gesture that he hoped would communicate gratitude and appreciation. The adult seemed to understand and made clicking sounds that might have been acknowledgement. The adult then surprised Jake by pulling out a small translation device similar to the one Vexitar had used. The being spoke into it and Jake heard accented English words. "We guard you because Vexitar says you are now clan family. Clan family must be protected from danger." "What kind of danger?" Jake asked. "This world has creatures that hunt at night. Also other clans that might not understand you are under our protection. We make sure you stay safe until council meeting." Jake felt a wave of gratitude and relief. The Watchers were indeed protectors, not guards. These beings had taken responsibility for human safety, based on his rescue of their children. "Thank you," Jake said. "We are honored by your protection." The adult made what might have been a smile, then spoke into the translator again. "Vexitar comes at midday sun with full council. 12 clan leaders will meet with your people. This is great honor. Few outsiders ever meet full council." That information made Jake both excited and nervous. 12 clan leaders suggested a much larger civilization than he had imagined. The river clans were apparently a significant political entity, not just a small forest tribe. "We will be ready," Jake assured the adult. The being nodded, then added something else through the translator. "Vextar says bring gifts for council if your people have customs for such meetings. Show respect for clan leaders and they will show respect for you." Jake thought about what gifts they could offer. Their emergency supplies included some advanced human technology that might be appropriate diplomatic presents. Medical supplies, tools, and information storage devices could show human friendship while demonstrating their capabilities. The adult returned to the forest and Jake went back inside the ship to tell his crew about the conversation. Everyone was relieved to learn that the Watchers were protectors rather than guards. But they were also nervous about meeting 12 clan leaders at once. "That's a lot of important people to impress," Amy said. "We better not mess this up." Jake gathered his crew and they spent the morning preparing for the council meeting. They selected gifts that would be useful without being threatening. Medical scanners that could help treat injuries. Water purification tablets that could improve health. Digital storage devices loaded with human art, music, and literature to show their culture. Dr. Park prepared a basic presentation about human civilization and values. Nothing too technical or threatening, but enough to show that humans were peaceful explorers rather than conquerors. Amy worked on diplomatic protocols, trying to anticipate what behavior would be considered respectful. The sun reached its highest point. Jake heard movement in the forest that was different from their usual Watchers. This was a larger group moving with formal purpose rather than stealth. Jake looked out the window and saw an impressive sight. 12 tall figures emerged from the trees, walking in ceremonial formation. Each wore elaborate clothing and carried symbols of authority. At their head walked Vextar, looking even more impressive than he had the day before. Behind the council came what looked like an honor guard of younger warriors. "They're here," Jake announced to his crew, "and they brought quite an entourage." Amy looked out the window and whistled softly. "That's definitely a formal diplomatic delegation. We better get this right." Jake picked up their prepared gifts and opened the ship's hatch. Whatever happened next would determine the future relationship between humans and the river clans. Jake stepped outside to greet the most important alien diplomatic mission in human history. Jake woke to the sound of Amy shaking his shoulder urgently. The first pale light of dawn was coming through the small windows of their crashed ship. But something was different about this morning. Amy's face showed excitement mixed with nervousness. "Jake, you need to see this right now," Amy whispered. "Get up and look outside, but don't make any sudden movements." Jake rolled out of his bunk and moved quietly to the window. What he saw took his breath away completely. The forest around their camp was no longer empty. Emerging from the trees in perfect formation were more native beings than Jake could count quickly. They moved with military precision, their scaled skin gleaming in the early morning light. "How many?" Jake whispered. "I've been counting," Amy replied quietly. "At least 100, maybe more. They've been arriving all night in small groups and forming up just before dawn." Jake studied the formation more carefully. These were not the same beings they had met over the past few days. Most of these were warriors carrying weapons that blended sophisticated design with traditional craftsmanship. Their movements showed military training and discipline. At the front of the formation walked a figure that commanded immediate attention. This being was taller than even Vextar, and wore elaborate ceremonial armor decorated with precious stones and carved bone. A crown of intricate metalwork sat upon the being's head, marking obvious royal or supreme authority. "Wake the others," Jake told Amy. "But keep everyone calm. I don't think this is an attack, but we need to be ready for anything." Amy quietly roused Tony, Gary, and Dr. Park, while Jake continued watching the incredible scene outside. The 100 warriors had formed a perfect semicircle around the human camp. They stood at attention with weapons held in formal positions, not threatening, but unmistakably powerful. "What do you think they want?" Dr. Park whispered as she joined Jake at the window. "I have a feeling we're about to find out," Jake replied. The royal figure at the front of the formation raised one hand and the entire group of warriors came to attention simultaneously. The precision was remarkable, showing years of training and absolute discipline. This was not a random gathering, but a carefully planned military ceremony. Jake noticed two smaller figures walking beside the royal leader. Even at this distance, he recognized Keth and Lyra, the children he had rescued from the river 3 days ago. The children looked excited rather than afraid and kept pointing toward the human ship. "Those are the kids I saved," Jake told his crew. "They're with whoever is leading this group." Amy studied the scene carefully with her military training. The weapons and formations suggest this is some kind of honor guard rather than an attack force. But that's a lot of firepower to bring to a peaceful meeting. Jake made a decision. "I'm going outside. Everyone else stays here unless I signal for you to join me." "Jake, that could be dangerous," Tony protested. "We don't know what they want yet." "I think I do know," Jake said. "Yesterday, Vextar mentioned something about clan law and family obligations. I think this ceremony is related to saving those children. But there's only one way to find out for sure." Jake gathered his sidearm but left it holstered and obviously non-threatening. He picked up the gifts they had prepared for diplomatic meetings, then slowly opened the ship's hatch. The morning air was cool and filled with the sounds of 100 beings breathing and moving in perfect formation. Jake stepped into the clearing with his hands visible and empty, except for the diplomatic gifts. The royal figure watched his every movement with large amber eyes that showed intelligence and careful evaluation. Jake walked forward until he was about 20 feet from the formation, then stopped and waited. The royal leader stepped forward while the warriors remained in perfect position. As the being approached, Jake could see more details of the elaborate costume and ceremonial weapons. This was clearly someone of immense importance among the river clans. To Jake's surprise, the leader spoke in accented but clear English without using a translation device. "I am Vextar, clanfather of the river people, and supreme war leader of the allied tribes. You are Jake Morrison, the sky person who saved my children from the deadly waters." Jake realized this imposing figure was the father of the 2 children he had rescued. The ceremony suddenly made more sense. This was a father bringing his entire military force to meet the person who had saved his children's lives. "I am honored to meet you," Jake replied with a respectful bow. "Your children are brave and intelligent. I was glad I could help them." Vextar studied Jake carefully, then made a gesture toward the children. Keth and Lyra ran forward, chattering excitedly in their native language while pointing at Jake and making gestures toward the river. Vextar listened to their animated account, then nodded with what might have been approval. "My children tell me you risked your own life to save them from the river's power," Vextar said. "The current was strong and the water was cold. You could have died attempting such a rescue." "Any decent person would have done the same thing," Jake replied. "No," Vextar said firmly. "Many people would have watched from safety rather than risk danger for strangers. Your actions show the character of your heart and the honor of your people." Vextar raised his voice so that everyone could hear clearly, both the warriors and Jake's crew watching from the ship. "By ancient law, one who saves the children of a clan becomes bound to that clan as family. The debt can never be repaid, but it must be acknowledged with honor." The 100 warriors suddenly moved in perfect unison. They planted their weapons in the ground and knelt on one knee, while placing their right hands over their hearts. The display was breathtaking in its precision and obvious respect. "These warriors are not here to threaten you," Vextar explained. "They are here to pledge their service to you as an adopted member of our clan. By saving my children, you have bound yourself to our people forever." Jake was stunned by the implications. "I don't understand exactly what that means." "It means you are no longer a stranger on our world. You are family. You have the protection of our warriors, the wisdom of our elders, and the loyalty of our people. But you also have obligations to us as we have to you." Vextar gestured for the warriors to rise. "However, we understand you are not of our world and have your own people to serve. We do not claim you against your will, but we offer you a choice." The ceremony continued with Vextar explaining the terms of the ancient law. Jake could choose to accept full membership in the clan with all its rights and responsibilities, or he could accept an honorary status that would maintain friendly relations without binding obligations. But there was a third option that Vextar proposed. Your people and our people could form an alliance. Your knowledge of the stars combined with our knowledge of this world could benefit both civilizations. You would serve as the first ambassador between our species. Jake looked back at his ship where his crew was watching through the windows. Then he looked at the 100 warriors who had come to honor a simple act of human decency. This was an opportunity that went far beyond their original mission. I need to discuss this with my crew, Jake said. This decision affects all of us. Of course, Vextar agreed. But know that my offer is made in good faith. Your actions 3 days ago proved that humans can be trusted as allies rather than feared as conquerors. That is worth more than you may realize. Jake gestured for his crew to join him outside. As Amy, Tony, Gary, and Dr. Park emerged from the ship, the 100 warriors came to attention again, showing respect for all. The humans, not just Jake. The morning sun climbed higher as two species stood, facing each other at a moment that would change both civilizations forever. Jake knew that whatever decision they made this day would echo through history as the moment humans and the river clans chose cooperation over conflict. Vexitar waited patiently while Jake spoke quietly with his crew. The 100 warriors remained at perfect attention, showing the discipline and respect that marked their military tradition. The two children, Keth and Lyra, stayed close to their father, but watched the humans with obvious curiosity and excitement. Amy was the first to speak when Jake explained the situation to his team. This is incredible, Jake. We came here on a simple survey mission and now we're being offered the chance to establish the first human alliance with an alien civilization. It's bigger than that, Dr. Park added with excitement. Vextar mentioned allied tribes and clans. We could be looking at contact with an entire planetary government, not just one local group. Tony had more practical concerns. What about our ship and getting home? Are we supposed to stay here permanently or can we still complete our original mission? Gary nodded in agreement. Command will be expecting us to return with our survey data. We can't just disappear without explanation. Jake looked back at Vextar, who was speaking quietly with several of his warriors. The alien leader seemed to be explaining the situation to his people just as Jake was consulting with his crew. Let me ask him about the practical details, Jake said. Jake approached Vextar respectfully. We are honored by your offer, but we have questions about how this arrangement would work. Ask your questions freely, Vextar replied. Understanding between our peoples must be built on complete honesty. Our people will be expecting us to return home, Jake explained. If we accept your offer to establish an alliance, how do we maintain contact with human civilization? Vexitar smiled in a way that suggested he had expected this question. We have been monitoring your people's activities in this region of space for many years. We know about your colonies and trade routes. An alliance with humans has been under consideration by our council for some time. That was surprising news. The river clans had been studying humanity and planning for eventual contact. Yesterday's rescue had not created the opportunity for alliance, but had simply accelerated plans that were already in development. Your ship can be repaired, Vextar continued. Our people have knowledge of metals and engineering that your crew lacks. But more importantly, we have materials on this world that could improve your technology significantly. Jake translated this information for his crew. Tony was immediately interested in the engineering knowledge, while Dr. Park wanted to know more about the advanced materials Vexitar mentioned. There's something else you should know, Vexitar said. Your rescue of my children was not the first contact between humans and our people, but it was the first time a human acted with complete selflessness toward our kind. Vextar explained that other human ships had visited this world over the past several years. Some encounters had been neutral, with both species avoiding contact. But others had been less positive, with humans attempting to claim territory or resources without regard for native inhabitants. Previous sky people saw us as obstacles to overcome or resources to exploit, Vextar said. But you saw drowning children and thought only of saving lives. That difference in character convinced our council that some humans could be trusted as allies. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His split-second decision to dive into the river had become a test of human character that would influence relations between two civilizations. Amy asked the question that was on everyone's mind. If we agree to this alliance, what exactly would be expected of us? You would become our first human ambassadors, Vextar replied. Your ship would be repaired and improved with our technology. You would travel between our world and human colonies, establishing trade and cultural exchange. Your crew would be the bridge connecting our peoples. Dr. Park was fascinated by the possibilities. What kind of technology and materials are you talking about? Vextar gestured to one of his warriors who brought forward what looked like a simple metal spear. But when Vextar activated a hidden control, the spear transformed into a complex energy weapon with advanced targeting systems. Our ancestors chose to live simply, Vextar explained, but we never abandoned knowledge or technology. We hide our capabilities behind primitive appearances to avoid attracting the wrong kind of attention from space travelers. Tony examined the transformed weapon with professional interest. The engineering is remarkable. You've somehow combined advanced electronics with traditional metalworking in ways I've never seen. Our materials science is particularly advanced, Vextar continued. We can create metals that are stronger and lighter than anything your people currently use. Our energy systems are more efficient than your current technology. An alliance would benefit both our civilizations. Gary asked about the military implications. Those 100 warriors out there suggest your people take security seriously. Would this alliance involve any kind of mutual defense arrangements? Vextar considered the question carefully. Our warrior traditions exist to protect our people and our way of life. We do not seek conquest, but we defend what is ours absolutely. An alliance with humans would include mutual protection against outside threats. Jake looked at his crew and saw excitement mixed with nervousness on every face. This was an opportunity beyond anything they had imagined when they started their survey mission. But it was also a responsibility that would change their lives forever. We need some time to make this decision, Jake told Vextar. Of course, the alien leader replied. But while you consider, I would like to offer you a demonstration of our commitment to this alliance. Vexitar spoke in his native language to the assembled warriors. They responded by performing an intricate ceremony that involved the presentation of weapons and formal pledges of loyalty. Jake realized he was witnessing something that probably had not been seen by outsiders in generations. The ceremony concluded with Vextar presenting Jake with a ceremonial weapon similar to the transforming spear he had demonstrated earlier. This marks you as an honorary member of our warrior class, Vextar explained. It also serves as a communication device that will allow you to contact us from anywhere on this world. Jake accepted the weapon with appropriate ceremony, knowing that this gift represented trust and respect that went far beyond simple diplomacy. The 100 warriors came to attention one final time, then began forming up for their return march to their settlements. I will return tomorrow for your answer, Vextar said, but know that regardless of your decision, you will always be welcome among our people. The debt we owe you for saving my children can never be fully repaid. As the warriors disappeared back into the forest, Jake and his crew stood in their clearing, holding advanced alien technology and contemplating a decision that would echo through history. Well, Amy said finally, I don't think any of us expected our survey mission to turn into first contact diplomacy. Jake looked at the ceremonial weapon in his hands, then at his crew. Whatever we decide, we're going to change the course of human history. The question is whether we're ready for that kind of responsibility. That night they would have the most important discussion of their lives, knowing that their choice would determine the future relationship between humanity and the river clans. Jake spent the entire night walking around their camp thinking about the decision they had to make. The ceremonial weapon Vextar had given him felt warm in his hands and occasionally glowed with soft light when he held it correctly. Even this simple gift demonstrated technology that was decades ahead of current human capabilities. His crew had debated the alliance offer until well past midnight. Amy supported the idea from a strategic perspective, believing that peaceful contact with an advanced alien civilization could benefit all of humanity. Dr. Park was excited about the scientific opportunities and cultural exchange possibilities. Tony was fascinated by the engineering knowledge they could gain and share. Only Gary had serious reservations. What if we're making promises we can't keep, he had argued. We don't represent the human government or military. We're just a survey crew who happened to crash land here. Jake understood Gary's concerns, but he also knew they were being offered something unprecedented in human history. The chance to establish friendly relations with an intelligent alien species based on mutual respect rather than conquest or exploitation. When Vextar arrived the next morning, he brought only a small group of advisors, rather than the full 100 warriors. Jake took this as a positive sign that the alien leader was approaching this as a diplomatic discussion rather than a military ceremony. "Have you reached a decision?" Vextar asked without preliminary conversation. Jake looked at his crew one more time. Amy nodded encouragingly. Dr. Park smiled with obvious excitement. Tony gave him a thumbs-up gesture. Even Gary managed a supportive nod despite his earlier concerns. "We accept your offer of alliance," Jake said formally. "We would be honored to serve as the first ambassadors between our peoples." Vextar's expression showed satisfaction and what might have been relief. "I am pleased. Our council believed humans had the potential to be valuable allies, but we needed proof of your character. Your actions provided that proof." What followed was a day of revelations that completely changed Jake's understanding of the situation. Vextar led the human crew on a journey through the forest to settlements that were far more advanced than anything they had imagined. The river clans had built their civilization underground and within the forest canopy to avoid detection from space. What looked like primitive woodland from orbit was actually home to millions of beings with technology that rivaled or exceeded human capabilities in many areas. "We learned long ago that displaying advanced technology attracts unwanted attention from aggressive species," Vextar explained as they toured underground facilities. "Better to appear primitive and peaceful while maintaining the knowledge and tools needed to defend ourselves if necessary." The aliens had been monitoring human radio transmissions and ship movements for over 50 years. They had learned human languages and studied human culture and technology. The translation devices were just one result of decades of careful observation and analysis. "We have been waiting for the right moment to reveal ourselves," Vextar continued. "Previous human visitors showed us that your species includes both honorable individuals and dangerous ones. We needed to find humans we could trust before making contact." Jake's rescue of the children had provided exactly the proof the Alien Council needed. The act demonstrated human values of compassion and self-sacrifice that the river clans respected and wanted to encourage. Over the following weeks, Jake and his crew lived among the river clans, learning about their culture and technology, while sharing information about human civilization. The aliens were particularly interested in human art, music, and literature, which they found fascinating and different from their own cultural expressions. The repair of the human ship became a collaborative project that improved the vessel far beyond its original specifications. River Clan engineers provided new alloys that made the hull stronger and lighter. Their energy systems increased engine efficiency by over 300%. Most importantly, they installed communication equipment that would allow constant contact between the ship and the alien homeworld. "Your ship will now serve as the first embassy vessel between our civilizations," Vextar explained. "When you return to human space, you will carry our formal offer of alliance to your leaders." Dr. Park had spent weeks studying RiverClan science and was amazed by what she learned. "Their materials technology is centuries ahead of ours," she told Jake. "But our computer systems and artificial intelligence research is more advanced than theirs. We really can benefit each other through cooperation." The alliance agreement that emerged from these discussions was comprehensive and forward-looking. The river clans would share their advanced materials and energy technology with humanity. In return, humans would provide computer technology and serve as intermediaries in contact with other spacefaring civilizations. Trade routes would be established between river clan worlds and human colonies. Cultural exchange programs would allow students from both species to learn from each other. Most importantly, both civilizations committed to mutual defense against hostile alien threats. "We have identified several aggressive species in this region of space," Vextar revealed. "Some have threatened both human and river clan territories. An alliance between our peoples will provide security that neither of us could achieve alone." Jake accepted the permanent position of human ambassador to the river clans. Amy became his deputy and military liaison. Dr. Park was appointed as chief scientific coordinator for technology exchange. Tony became head of engineering cooperation between the two species. Even Gary found a role as pilot and navigator for diplomatic missions. The two children Jake had, saved Keth and Lyra, became living symbols of the friendship between humans and river clans. They learned to speak English fluently and often served as cultural interpreters, helping both species understand each other better. On the day Jake's crew finally prepared to depart for human space to present the Alliance proposal, they were honored with the largest ceremony in River Clan history. Representatives from all the allied tribes gathered to witness the formal establishment of diplomatic relations. Vextar presented Jake with a permanent honor guard of 12 River Clan warriors who would serve as protectors and cultural ambassadors on human worlds. "These warriors represent the bond between our peoples," Vextar said. "They will ensure that the alliance remains strong and that both species honor their commitments to each other." As Jake's enhanced ship lifted off from the forest world, looked down at the hidden civilization that had become his second home. The simple act of saving 2 children from a river had grown into the foundation of interstellar alliance that would benefit both species for generations to come. The rescue had proven that humans were capable of selfless heroism that transcended species boundaries. That proof had convinced an advanced alien civilization to trust humanity as partners rather than fear them as threats. Jake realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could have the most profound consequences. 6 months later, Jake stood in the chambers of the Human Colonial Council, presenting the River Clan Alliance proposal to the leaders of human civilization. Behind him stood Vexitar and a delegation of River Clan diplomats ready to formally establish the first peaceful alliance between humanity and an alien species. The proposal was accepted unanimously. The age of human isolation in the galaxy was over, replaced by an era of cooperation and mutual growth that would carry both civilizations to achievements neither could have reached alone. Jake often thought back to that moment by the river when he had seen 2 children in danger and acted without thinking. That simple human response to help those in need had opened a door between worlds and created possibilities that would echo through the stars for centuries to come.